שולחים את זה לחוץ לארץ.
וזה בעיקר הסיבה שאנחנו שולחים את זה לקרובים בחוץ לארץ, שהם יבינו. אז קודם כל אני רוצה להודות ל-Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. We want to thank the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs for hosting us. I think it's very appropriate that we're sitting in this room because 4 years ago we all sat and heard an academic talk by Rela, which was very impressive on Jewish grandparenting. And that was one of the last areas that she was active in her academic work. It may be a little bit inappropriate that we're having a sad event on Rosh Chodesh Adar, but on the other hand, I think we all have very pleasant memories of Rela, and so I think that does make it appropriate for today. I'd like to call on Dr. Manfred Gerstenfeld, who was the former chairman of the board of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, where Rela was also on the board.
Rela, Zichona Levacha, was a dear colleague. I met her through the late Dan Elazar long ago. She was always helpful. I remember her on 2 different planes. We were colleagues on the board of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs for more than 15 years. And as a board member, Rela was always willing to help out on whatever was asked from her. She oversaw the American JCPA office when she was president of the Baltimore Hebrew University, and also thereafter from Philadelphia. And I can only speak for my 12 years as chairman of the center, but I would like to express my great appreciation for all the help she gave us during that time. Second plane I want to address concerns Rela's professional work. She was an important sociologist of religion of the American Jewish community. In all the conversations I had with her, I learned something about American Jewry. And I thought that perhaps the best way to honor Rela is to briefly summarize the 3 lengthy interviews I had with her and which I have published. They give a very broad, but far from complete overview of subjects she dealt with and her thoughts about these subjects. The first time I interviewed Rela was for my book American Jewry's Challenge, published in 2005 in the framework of the biggest project the Jerusalem Center has ever had. It was an assignment from Pew. In that interview, titled Sociological Changes in the Community, Rela said that, quote, more and more of American wealth is in the hands of women. When more wealth is transferred to the next generation, the wealth will be shared by women, end of quote. And Rela said in that interview, for many decades, the philosophy of fundraising was talk to the man and get the woman out of the way. This was based on a stereotype that regarded women as selfish, urging their husbands not to give, so as to ensure more disposable income for themselves. Rela spoke about 15 years ago about the rise of the mega donors, how the synagogue remained American Jewry's most important grassroots institution, the increasing cost of Jewish life, the changes in the Jewish family. Many 3rd and 4th generation extended families are all alive, she said. She addressed the different denominational attitudes, the re-emergence of the mikveh among non-orthodoxy, and the change from traditional uses. She also spoke about new concept of ethics, such as on the left of the community, inverted commas, how can I ask my partner to convert to my religion if I do not want to convert to his or hers. End of quotation. The word life cycle recurred often in her publications, and issues concerning women were never far away. My second interview with Rela was published in the JCPA series, Changing Jewish Communities, which I was directing. It was titled, How the Status of American Jewish Women Has Changed over the Past Decades. One of the many things she pointed out, that until a few decades ago, Jewish women were literally written out of Jewish history. Only in the second edition of the Encyclopedia Judaica, more attention was given to women. She mentioned that the first Encyclopedia Judaica didn't even have an entry on Jewish women. The article on kashrut didn't discuss the role of women. She revised articles for the second edition and pointed out that while supervision and shchita were male tasks, the community had to rely on women to keep the dietary laws. Women had to teach their daughters how to observe them. Separation of milk and meat in the kitchen was entirely in the hands of women. Without trust in the faithful execution by women of mitzvot, commandments related to kashrut, there would have been no observance of the dietary law of the aspects of the Jewish calendar, such as Pesach. My third interview with Rela was for a book by Stephen Behm and myself in 2010, American Jewry's Comfort Level. The interview was titled, as already been mentioned here, Jewish Grandparenting in the United States. It was an original topic. Rela said, in the past, we talked about the sandwich generation, those adults who were trying to raise their children and pay for their schooling while simultaneously taking care of their aging parents. End of quote. Rela observed, quote, we have now moved to a situation where some grandparents are taking care of great-grandparents. She added, I call this the double-decker sandwich generation. Rela discussed in this interview issues such as, I quote, stereotypes of grandparents, the issue of interfaith couples, how the analysis of the grandparenting situation leads to studying inexorably the entire extended family, including aunts, uncles and cousins. Rela concluded that interview with many questions. She also wondered whether the fifth of the 10 commandments that one should honor one's father and mother also meant that one should honor one's grandparents. I hope that I have given you, in these few minutes, a brief selection from my interviews with Rela, some idea of the breadth of her interests. May her memory be blessed.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to call on Rabbi Jeremy Barron, Rela's grandnephew, and one of the more newer additions to our family in Israel.
We made Aliyah 2.5 years ago, so not so new. But I still do most of my daily life in English, so I will also speak in English. We've got Rosh Chodesh tonight and Purim coming up, so I just want to start with Var Torah that reminds me of Rela. The Midrash says that, the Gemara quoting, or bringing a Midrash says that at Purim we have a re-acceptance of the Torah. Kimu Mashi Kiblu Kfar. And the issue, the Gemara discusses that at the original, at Har Sinai, when they originally received the Torah, the Gemara says, Kaf aleim har kigigi, that there was some kind of what sounds like coercion to the Jewish people. So the question is, how could the Torah be considered binding on the Jewish people if there was some level of coercion? And there's different interpretations of this Gemara. And then, however you interpret it, you have to address why Purim is different. So one explanation is that the Jewish people, when they left Har Sinai, when they left Egypt and were at Har Sinai, so they had just experienced the 10 plagues, they just experienced going out of Egypt, and they just experienced Kriyat Yam Suf. So when someone, a deity, let's call him God, offers you, does all these miracles and says, "So, are you with me? I have a deal." It kind of reminds me of a deal you can't refuse, right? You've got miracles, you've got it. What are they supposed to say? No, like thanks but no thanks. It seems incongruous with the experience they've just experienced. So what changes 500 or however 1,000 years later around the time of the Purim story? What's different? So one explanation is that they had, at Har Sinai, what they had miracles and they had prophecy. And yet, when you fast forward to the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash in the time of the Purim story, those are two things that somewhat get lost. Open miracles, the idea that Hashem's name, God's name, is not even in the Megillah, that what goes on is behind the scenes. And it's also the ending period of prophecy. There's no more prophets right around that time. So one could say that that level of relationship with God that the Jewish people had was not going to be continuing. What they accepted at Mount Sinai was not going to be continuing beyond. So one could say, hey, the Jewish people are saying, we didn't sign up for this. This is not what we signed up for. And so at Purim, when they experience what they do without the open miracles that they've experienced in the past, and without the prophets continuing, and nonetheless Jewish people say, we're here, we accept kimu v'kiblu, but they accepted what had already been accepted. They're saying even this love relationship with Hashem, which is somewhat more removed, somewhat more hidden, we're still signing on the dotted line. So for us, my sister and other relatives have mentioned that Rela for us was kind of our branch of the family's link to the past. As a historian, whenever we had questions about the Geffens, thank God we have Rabbi David Geffen, is also Shiva Chaim Aruchim. But for our personal wing, the questions that we would have would go to Aunt Rela. Who was this person named for? And she was our link to the past. So in a certain sense, for our specific wing of the family, it feels like we have to be ready for the next stage, just like Bnei Israel we had to be ready for the next stage. For us, with Rela's passing, it's kind of needing to be ready for the next stage. Although I would expect, David, that you're going to get a lot more questions coming your way. So just to share a few personal things about Rela, I always used to like calling her up because I could say, my great aunt Rela, and appreciating the syntactical ambiguity that afforded. She used to call herself Doda Rela, always preferring or liking Hebrew terms. And just a few recollections. I remember going to her house. I visited her in three kind of her modes. Most often she would come to our family events, but a few different times it was kind of seeing her on her home turf. So one example was I got to go to her house in Philadelphia. And there were two things that stood out from that. One was her wanting to share Uri's baseball collection with me, baseball card collection with me, and seeing some old cards that I had appreciation for, the value of them. I don't know, Uri, if you still have those. I hope you do.
Yes, yes he does.
Yes, he does. Okay, so I hope their value continues to go up. But so one thing she wanted to show me was that, and another thing was something which I looked up the name last night, a Franklin busybody. Does anyone know what a Franklin busybody is? So they had a 3-story house, okay, but they were very narrow, kind of townhouses. So hanging out the window, they have this special mirror, 3-mirror contraption. I couldn't figure out how it worked. But it was something that you're inside, you could look down and you could see who's standing at your front door and you could see what's going on the street below. And so she was very proud of this. She told me that Ben Franklin invented it, which is the legend. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's the legend. It's true. Okay. Sounds like we have Philadelphia people here. So they'll tell you if it's true whether or not Ben Franklin invented it. But so that was the kind of thing where just knowing, she liked, as most of us who knew Rela, she knew a lot and she wanted to know everything. And so just that kind of was an example of wanting to share with me that she had this neat contraption, and also what the contraption symbolizes of just wanting to see, wanting to know everything. I thought it was apropos. I had the bliss of visiting her in the office in Maryland when she was the president of Baltimore Hebrew University. And I can't remember the specifics, but it's something about some big medallion that she had, which again, university presidents do have. But I remember her showing that off to me. And I know she was very proud that part of her contract was that she would be able to come to Israel on a regular basis while she was president there. So the appreciation of Israel that evidently on our wing of the family, which stems largely from Aunt Rela, as far as representing that, her appreciation, thank God, my sister, my brother, and myself have all been able to make Aliyah. I also, the last place I got to visit her was on her turf, was in her home apartment after she moved to an apartment in Philadelphia. And the thing she wanted to show off to me was the Vilna Shas that the Geffen family had from Vilna, I guess.
There are two of them.
I'm sorry, one of the two Vilna Shasas. But it was the tall black volumes. And just the fact that of all the things that when I came to her apartment, that was what she was most proud to show me. The other major association with Rela, aside from her, it's funny because people talk about her intellect and her scholarship. To us, it was just Aunt Rela. And she would make comments about grandparenting that rang true in my own family. About how my grandmother would both be calling her mother-in-law, her mother-in-law on a daily basis, and her children on a daily basis. And I didn't exactly take the comment as such a scholarly note. It was kind of just an anecdotal evidence, but I got to see her documenting these things in our personal life. And the other last thing was that Rela was always very generous, whether it was getting clothes for my nieces and nephews, or the Kiddush cups that she would always get us, or it's different. She loved the artist Emmanuel. So every Shabbos, or every Yom Tov specifically, we have a Chalkal that's a Shabbos with Yom Tov. So we make sure to always use that on Yom Tov, and we always talk about how that was from Aunt Rela. We were very appreciative, we talked about how I always thought of her as the cat with 9 lives. The fact that every time she'd be in the hospital and something would be wrong with her health, then she'd come out and she'd be fine enough afterwards. So we were very blessed to have that extended relationship with her. And the last thing I tried to call, I called her every so often, and it was always great to be able to talk to her, because even if it was a topic upon which we disagreed, I was able to talk with her a lot more freely than certain other family members without it being personal. We were able to talk about it intellectually, and it was very open. And even if we were on different sides of the spectrum on it, and I really appreciated that. And when I tried calling her in the hospital, the last time she was in the hospital, I wasn't sure if I'd get through to her. My aunt said she couldn't talk right then, but I wanted to tell her that on the Kiddush cups that she always used to give us, to give me for my kids, and one of them twice because the Kiddush cup got lost. She always wanted it printed on it, Yeled Tov or Yalda Tova. So my message to her, what I tried to be the last message while she was alive, and certainly I'm sure she can appreciate the message now, is that we're trying to be Yeladim Tovim. So, and that is certainly a message from her and a lesson that we carry forth. She has Zichra Baruch.
Were very moving memories, and I could just add, we had the privilege of being with Rela just a week before she passed away, and she still showed us the Vilna Shas, among many other things that she was proud of. I'd like to call now on Rabbi Jim LeBeau, who was a good friend and colleague of Rela.
I don't think I knew anyone better equipped than Rela to walk into a room and command that room. The spotlight immediately would be on her. She would size everyone up, and she already made a contribution. She was a personality whenever she came. There's a reference in the Talmud to Rav that he asked that his eulogy be warm and personal because he would be there. I suspect that Rela is here with us today as well. She was respected by her colleagues, and because of the serious research that she did, and she was a very popular lecturer all around the United States. Many of you probably know that she was a voracious reader. I remember spending some time with her in Philadelphia, and she asked if I would go with her as she had some errands to do. And one of the errands was to stop at a used bookstore. She had a box of about 10 novels, paperback novels, that she was returning. She had read them during the week, and she was getting another 10 or 12 that she would read during the coming week. And I think that because that was so well known about her, because she was a speed reader, she was appointed to many book award committees. and made quite a contribution in that area as well. Rela and I actually met 61 years ago at a USY keynote, and we formed a warm friendship. Even though we differed on many topics, we were always open to debate. Probably the lifetime discussion that we had centered around the topic of observance. I was raised in a non-observant home, and my brother and I both were influenced by USY to become observant, to become traditional Jews. Whereas Rela, of course, was raised in a very observant home. And we discussed whether or not it was a more meaningful observance for someone to choose to maintain what they were given by their family and experienced in their home, or for someone to choose observance, to take on observance and continue in their lives. And I suspect that this interest expanded into an examination of faith and belief. And it reflects Rela's lifelong interest in her examination of and evaluation of conservative Judaism. She contributed a great deal to our community because of her observations. All of Rela's friends will miss our encounters with her. I express my thanks to the Mintz and Geffen family for organizing this Azkara for her. Her memory will remain for a blessing.
Now I'd like to call on the Dean of our family in Israel, Rabbi David Geffen, first cousin of Rela.
I'm not sure I'm the dean, but I like to investigate family history. So I can tell you we are now down to 14 first cousins. And yesterday, or day before, Stanley Raskas called me from New York, and he sends his greetings. Yesterday, Peter wrote from Morocco, and he sends his greetings. A few hours ago, I met someone where I live, and she talked about Sarah Geller, our cousin. So anyway, we're fortunate that what has happened through the years is that we've been able to maintain a very close relationship. It has to do with our grandparents and our parents in particular, and Rela, of course, was very significant in all of this. So the first note I'll just give you about Rela, which and her father also, is that when her father was born in Kovna in 1902, since our great-grandfather Yosef Geffen had died only a year or so before, so Rabbi and Mrs. Geffen gave Yosef was his name. Later on, his wife decided his name should be Joel, but that was the way our Aunt Sylvia was. Anyway, but then Rabbi Geffen's mother, her actual name was Rela. And from the time Joel was named in 1902 until Rela was born in 1943, no one else was given that name. And so in our family, the great-grandparents from Kovna, Yosef and Rela, are both remembered in Joel, Sylvia, Lisa, Rela, in all of that family. So anyway, I just wanted to written down a few things about Rela and myself. We had some interesting get-togethers when we were very young, both of us. So first of all, my wife Rita, you'll hear some of her words in a little while. We were both very saddened by Rela's death, and Rita wrote something specific. And in addition, our children, Avi, Elisa, and Tuvia, they also knew Rela and Mike, because when we were living in Wilmington, Delaware, Rela and Mike would bring down Uri and Ami, and our children would play together. So our children all remember Rela and Uri and Ami when they were little and when our children were little. A beautiful, joyous spirit, our Rela Zal has left us. We have all mourned her, a close, loving, and lovely family member. Her infectious smile we will always carry in our hearts. Oh, Rela, we will recall the joy that you brought us. Each of us can call to mind the first time we met her. In the mid-1940s, as an Army brat, returned with my parents to Atlanta, participated for the first time in the Geffen Seder on Washington Street. Aunt Sylvia and Uncle Joe brought Lisa and Rela. Together, Rav Tuvia and Sarah Hannah, Joel and Sylvia, Louis and Anna, Lisa and Rela and I celebrated the Seder. I don't think there were so many Geffens any time that have sat around a Seder table. The Seder was led by our patriarch. That was not the only time for several years. We were together because Joel and Sylvia made it a point to come to Atlanta for Pesach. It was a wonderful, wonderful feeling. During those years, I remember very warmly that Sylvia and Joel would take the three Geffen kids, Lisa, Rela, and myself, to the park to see the blossoming dogwoods and azaleas. I pushed Rela in the swings as her big cousin. Those pastoral days wove our kinship and friendship. But now it's December 1950. I was given an early bar mitzvah present, 11 months in advance. Sylvia and Joel invited me to come to New York and stay with them on West End Avenue. Rela and I had both grown up a bit. We played Monopoly and other games together. We walked over with Uncle Joel to the Museum of Natural History. Each of our uncles, Sam and Abe, took me to see other sites. Especially, I remember the Statue of Liberty. Then it snowed, and not like the snow at our late cousin Daniel's bar mitzvah. I don't know who, aside from Ruthie and myself, I don't think anybody else was here at that bar mitzvah. And Daniel, it was a very special time. But they taught me there how to be in the snow. But it snowed in New York. 20 centimeters of pristine white snow. It stayed on the ground. Uncle Joel took Rela and me to Riverside Park. There we had a joyous time with our sleds in the snow. A first-time sensation which this southerner still recalls. So a few moments ago was talking about a very famous rabbi from the conservative movement, Rabbi Morris Adler of blessed memory. And he wrote these words, which I believe capture the uniqueness of Rela. She was a teacher, and therefore hers was a poetic sensitivity to growth, to enlargement. Only a poet hears the grass grow, witness the flowers in their actual blossoming, beholds the ripening in the process in field and meadow. And only a teacher actually sees the seedlings of the youthful mind reach out for the light, germinating and sprouting under the loving touch of an inspired gardener. Rela, you were that gardener who refreshed yourself all the time. As the poet says, why build these cities glorious when man unbuilded goes? In vain we build an order unless the builder also grows. Tehi nishmata tzuror b'tzror achayim Rela bat Sivya v'harav Yosef Zal.
Now I'd like to call on Rabbi Alan Hoffman, another cousin of Rela's.
You want to talk from here? What? No, I don't want to. Hold the chairs.
I'm hoping.
Thank you. Nice. Sit up there.
David, you want to move that chair?
No, it's okay. Move the table. You excuse me, I'll speak sitting down. The alternative is a disaster. Rela was accomplished. She was a distinguished professor of sociology at Graz. She was the president of a college, indeed of a university, the Baltimore Hebrew University. As an academic author, Rela was a significant public intellectual in the continuing Jewish discourse concerning the role of women, the family, and even the traditional form and practice of Judaism itself. The various titles of her books contain such words as dilemmas and challenges, and freedom and responsibility. Rela did well by those words. Rela was also remarkably personable. As a cousin and a friend, she was warm, supportive, and caring, and so very engaging in conversation. She knew her own mind, and she was not afraid of expressing it, but she was also a good listener, focused, and empathetic. When I think of Rela, one of her most distinguishing characteristics was that she was always herself, Rela, and true to herself, whether as an innovating, pioneering public intellectual or a cousin at a family gathering. A month ago, we heard of Rela's death during Parshat Truma, when we received the command and call to build the Mishkan, the sanctuary. Thinking of her, I was reminded of the Midrash when Moses expressed doubts that Am Yisrael could accomplish such an amazing task. How could mere people build a home for the presence of the divine? The Midrash teaches us that Be'iskein HaMishkan, while they were discussing this, Moshe, Amar Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he turned to the Ribono Shel Olam, and he said, Hayecholim Heim Yisrael Hasoto, is it possible that mere mortals, that Israel, could build a Mishkan to contain the presence of God? The answer is very surprising. Amar le HaKadosh Baruch Hu, afilu echad miYisrael yachol lasoto. Even one individual of Israel is capable of building the Mishkan itself. Why? It goes on, Me'et kol ha-ish yidvenu libo, because it comes from the heart. What an astonishing answer. One of Israel is capable of building such an edifice. Rela came to mind, for she was so very much an individual, a one, and so very much of Israel as a leader. In Rela burned the love of Israel, Ahavat Yisrael, corporate and individual. One might suggest, Achad Misrael, that everyone, all of us, each of us, has the potential to build a mikdash. And indeed, in many ways, we know that's true. But in Rela, I think we sense that the requisite skills were there, such courage and such imagination. Speaking of courage and imagination, Rela was not a saint. She was alive, very vividly and vibrantly so. Stephanie and I were always curious to hear about how she had fared on her most recent visits to the casino to play 21. Always educable, she apparently had read a book on how to beat the house. And combining theory with practice, good sociologist that she was, she proceeded to do so, often stopping off in London casinos on her way to Israel. And of course, it is more appropriate that this is Erev Purim, or Rosh Chodesh Adar, so that would certainly fit in. We are now commemorating Rela Shloshim on Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, and this coming Shabbat we shall read Parshat Pekudei, when the Mishkan will be erected for the first time. Moses will be commanded to do it. Again appears a very puzzling midrash that Rashi paraphrases in his commentary, in which we are told that the Mishkan, the building, it was too heavy for all of Israel, so Moses had to do it by himself. Moses again had his doubts, rather understandably so. And God responds to Moses that all he must do is lay his hand upon it, just the touch, and it will occur of itself. Here again, doubts concerning the many are answered by the act of one. Still, it remains difficult to understand and invites inquiry. I would welcome Rela's interpretation. She is missed in so many ways by so many. We pray that her nuclear family, some of whom are here of course, her extended family, her colleagues, and her many friends may continue to experience nechama, consolation. She is missed. She may not be missed in the casinos of London, but they did not know her day job and what she accomplished in her life. For those of us who are privileged to know her well, day and night, she will continue to be missed. We will miss her imagination, her strength, and her touch. Just a touch. May her memory be for a blessing.
Let me just say one word about Talmud. Since the Talmud in Rela's house has been mentioned twice, I just want to tell you what the source of that Talmud is. Rabbi Geffen had a Bil Nashas, and that Bil Nashas stayed in his house, and when he passed away and the children had a lottery, my father won the Bil Nashas, and I rebounded it, brought it here, and our son Tuviu is named after Rabbi Geffen, has it in his home in Ramat HaSharon. The reason that there's a Talmud in Rela's house is because when Joel was ordained, Rabbi Geffen had a very noted book dealer, Avram David Geffen, who owned what is now the Strand bookstore at 14th Street in New York, and he arranged for Avram David Geffen to get a Bil Nashas for Joel. So that's how it got there.
I'd like to now call on Mr. Tani Elazar, a friend of the family.
Should stand?
Okay. All right, I'm standing.
I'll give you the walker, you can sit.
No, I'm good. The word of my wife is not holding me up.
First of all, my mother, Harriet, apologizes for not being able to be here this evening. She told me to report that, as she indeed is, she's skiing in Switzerland for the week, and when she comes back, she'll say hello. So I'm sorry. So Rela figures very large in my life, as I'm sure she does for many people. Gliding easily, gregariously between roles, taking in Ruti and myself as surrogate mother, and giving as she did many things in large, sweeping heaps of generosity. As long as we didn't need anything before 10 o'clock in the morning, but midnight was just fine for her. Smiling and laughing in great waves at her own jokes that ran between the witty and erudite, for the knowing insider to the, how to say, less so. An accessible target for our questions, both everyday and Shabbat highbrow. No question went unanswered, and then some, and then some, and then some. Educating always, sometimes by request, sometimes without reason or instigation. Her dialogues, often turned monologues, never failed to encompass every conceivable level of information. From the encyclopedic to the trivial, and always with that extra bit of gossip that made you a party to the story, willing or not. Nothing she did was half-hearted, other than ending something that she felt strongly about, which there were many things that she felt strongly about. With well-informed Talmudic intensity and database numbers, always, she always seemed to be champion some new idea or a new unconventional, why be boring, twist on an old idea. I guess that after a few years I was no longer surprised by the blindsiding nature of her quips and crusades, whether in favor of a new stopover location in London or a casino in Atlantic City, or an enterprising idea to bring Jewish values to bear on unsuspecting Jewish populations. It was never enough to support from afar if it was within her reach to act on it in practice. Of course, flying to London to support, I was just sitting next to a book by Deborah Lipstadt. So it was very important to go support her when she was being sued in London, and there were other reasons, as it's been mentioned before, to stop in London. I learned in her shadow that it is possible to be both total and controlled about things, whether they're flowered dish sets, commitments to ideas, peoples, endeavors, though the concept of lo alecha melacha ligmor always lay alive yet trembling in the shadow of velo ata ben chorin libatel mimena. At the end of that there would be an exclamation mark, hers I'm sure, and if it's not there in the original text, she'll go back 2,000 years, put it there. Though I know the text generally, as a call-out from Pirkei Avot, Rela would surely have given this battle cry its proper citing, with a few pirushim that she knew by heart alongside a few others she had heard from, and probably some family stories that had to do with it. There's a lot more to tell about her passion, her sharp mind, her endless commitment to Jewish people, the conservative movement, to the strength of community, the strength of women, the strength of the Jewish family, and so many other causes, but time will run out and the Rela stories won't. She'd probably get a kick out of telling many of them herself, verkeucht and verbessert, but time really is at an end, as Rela would never willingly admit. And to continue the Mishnah that I quoted, very appropriate in Rela's case, and I'll say it in the feminine, as she probably would as well. אם למדת תורה הרבה, נותנים לך שכר הרבה, ונאמן הוא בעל מלאכתך שישלם לך שכר פעולתך.
Since Rela was a great proponent of the woman's voice, I'd like to now call on Ruth Adar, Rela's cousin.
I want to thank everybody who has come, and I know there are a few people who were planning to come who didn't work out at the end, and I know that their thoughts are with us tonight, as well as the family in America who have been encouraging us, and I'm glad that we were able to work this out. I thank Sheila and Rachel for, I think we did it together very nicely, and it really wasn't, especially with the hospitality of the center, really, I'm very grateful that it worked out so nicely for us a little bit to participate. Before I say a few words of my own, as David mentioned, Rita was very sorry that she wasn't able to come, but she did sit to write a few of her memories, and I'd like to share them with you. We lived in Wilmington, Delaware from 1970 to 1977. David actually also mentioned it. Rela, Uri, and Ami lived in Philadelphia, a 30-minute drive from Wilmington. I remember sharing a few lovely afternoons together. Our children, Avi and Elisa, and later Tuvia Jeremy, who was born in 1970, enjoyed the company. They played indoors or outdoors if weather permitted, for we had a very large yard. Then she talks about when David and she lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania in the 1990s. Her doctor referred, I'll read it as she wrote it. My doctor referred me to a rheumatologist at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore for tests and recommendations. Rela was then the president of the Baltimore Hebrew College. We asked if we could spend the night in her apartment. She had previous engagements outside of the city, but graciously offered use of her apartment. We agreed on a safe place where she would leave her keys and gave explicit instructions how to unlock the doors to her building and her apartment. She left beds newly made and food in the refrigerator. Although not physically present, she was a perfect host. David had serious neck surgery at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia, and again I experienced Rela's graciousness and hospitality. I stayed in her townhouse. My last days occurred during the first days of Pesach. Rela decided almost at the last minute to have a Seder at her house. Determined and capable as always, she invited friends, shopped, cooked, baked, prepared all that was necessary for a Seder and sumptuous feast within 2 days. I was amazed that she was able to do it all so quickly and successfully. Rela loved her Geffen relatives. During the 42 years of our Aliyah, she visited Israel frequently, and we were always the recipients of her deep affection, sincere caring. I think all the stories that people have told ring a bell to all of us, because I think everybody has a few Rela stories. And I think whenever she did come into a room or come into our company, everybody knew she was there. When I notified my children that Rela had passed away, my eldest son Jay sent a picture of a matchbox, a silver matchbox for lighting Shabbos candles. So I said to him, what does that have to do with Rela? So he said when they got engaged, Rela was here, and she came all the way up to the house when they were with us to give them this gift. And she made a point of saying to my future daughter-in-law that this was a Kli Chodesh for women. This was a long time ago, and I don't think my daughter-in-law knew exactly where this was coming from and what this was all about. But I think within the course of the years, and Rela appeared every now and then, and they heard Rela's stories, she understood a little bit more the significance of it. But I thought the interesting thing was that through all these years, they remember who gave them that gift, which doesn't happen all the time. As far as my own stories, my relationship with Rela was really She was my next oldest cousin. And it seems like when I look back at it today that I kind of followed in her footsteps a little bit, especially when we started to get a little bit older. She came to Israel for the year on the Machon. No, she was on Machon something or other. And she came back and I went the next year. I don't know if it had so much influence on me, but I think it opened up a door that, and then when I just came back to the States and I decided to go to New York for college, we're not quite sure how that apartment, Fran and I got connected, and I think it must have been through Rela, because otherwise I don't know how I would have met. So